Laurie.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. I'm Laurie Worrall. I am the Executive Director for Partners for Campus Community Engagement. For those of you who don't know, on July 1st of this year, we officially changed our name from Campus Compact of New York and Pennsylvania to Partners for Campus Community Engagement. Before I introduce our panel, I want to thank the Lang Center at Swarthmore College for engaging PCCE and our network in their Engaged Scholars Symposium. We hold collaboration as an organizational value, so we're always happy to engage in good work with valuable colleagues. Today, we're discussing the role of engaged scholarship at anchor institutions in an era of uncertainty. We've put together a panel representing very different kinds of institutions. However, I do want to acknowledge, though, that due to conflicting schedules, we do in fact lack racial and ethnic diversity. It's a quality that we constantly try to strive for. But that said, today's conversation promises to be lively and interesting. So first up, Keith Taylor is the president of Gannon University in Erie, Pennsylvania. Gannon is a Catholic diocesan university that is playing a major role in the revitalization of Erie, Pennsylvania. Benjamin Berger is the executive director of the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility at Swarthmore College and an associate professor of political science. Founded as a Quaker institution, Swarthmore has a public commitment to peace, equity, and social responsibility. Lena DiStilio is the Vice Chancellor for Engagement and Community Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. Pitt is a public state-related research university which, quote, focuses on the impact and the relentless pursuit of change for good. Craig Talmage is Assistant Professor of Entrepreneurial Studies at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. Craig's scholarly work focuses on community and social capital development. Hobart and William Smith has adopted a collective impact model for its engagement with the Geneva, New York community. Finally, but not least, Laurie Worrall is the director of the Civic and Community Engagement Office at Buffalo State University. Buff State is a SUNY institution and has earned a strong reputation for its partnerships with the city of Buffalo. I do want to say that if and when you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function or tab at the bottom of your screen. Well, welcome to our august panel. I'm going to start by saying that for the purposes of our conversation today, let's use the Democracy Collaborative's definition of anchor institution, which is large public or nonprofit institutions that are physically rooted in a specific geographic area and play or could play a prominent economic role in their local communities. I think that's probably the shortest and sweetest definition of anchor institution that I've come across. Thank you, Laura, for pointing that out. So just to launch the conversation, I think let's start with mission. And so for the question I would pose to all of you is, how does your institutional mission drive and or define your institution's community engagement? And I'm going to let you decide who wants to answer that first before I call on you. Okay, Lena. Okay.
That's all right. Well, we're also polite here. I'll be the impolite one.
It's the first day of class.
There you go. There you go. Well, Gannon's purpose is transforming lives and inspiring transformation. And so when we start from our purpose, we're looking at not only transforming the lives of our students, but all of our employees, our colleagues being transformed in that process, but also transforming the lives of those around us, and not just transforming, but inspiring transformation in the communities and the people that we engage with. Our mission is really fundamentally about preparing socially responsible global citizens. So as an institution, as an urban Catholic faith-based institution, I think all those words lead into what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. In that we are an urban campus here in Erie. We also have a campus in Ruskin, Florida, but our founding is as a downtown urban institution. And as a Catholic institution, we have our heart out front as far as why we serve and how we serve. So our mission and our approach to achieving that mission really is driven by a sense that integrating learning on campus with community-based experiences is essential. And it's the only way and the primary way that we go about educating our students. And that is all for the purpose of serving and inspiring transformation in our city, in our community, in our neighbors, and the people that we serve. So our fundamental mission drives how we go about what we do, and goes about why, and goes to why we do what we do and what we do. And it's really at the heart of everything from program development, our work in community schools and healthcare partnerships, our water sustainability and our economic development drivers. It's how we fund and staff decisions, whether that's the Center for Social Concerns and Global Engagement or our West Bayfront projects. It goes to our master planning and facility revitalization, because we are an urban campus. So as we revitalize properties and we take them from their current state to, we think, a better state, all these things, $135 million later after 10 years, are a big piece of what we do. And each of our strategic plans has had one of its three goals over the last decade and a half. One of its three goals has been about engagement in the community. So our mission drives everything that we do, and certainly is at the heart of our community engagement.
So I spent about 17 years at DePaul University in Chicago, and a colleague at the University of Illinois at Chicago once said, well, it's easy for you guys. I mean, you can even talk about God in the classroom, and this is back in the 90s, right? But that we don't have that kind of mission. So I'd like to ask like Lena and Laura to chime in, because you're public institutions. And so how do you translate that kind of ethos, right, to the work that you do in a public institution where maybe you can't talk about God all that easily?
Well, Laurie, I appreciate the distinctions that you're raising. It's interesting to me, though, that most anchor institutions, those institutions that consider themselves anchors, really are fundamentally place-based and place-focused. And so that's probably the unifying thread, whether you are religiously affiliated, private, public, state-related, as we are at the University of Pittsburgh. So at Pitt, we are a system of institutions that hold this very unique classification within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as being state-related. So there's 4 state-related institutions. We are one of those. We're a premier research institution, but we are fundamentally place-focused. We are so deeply intertwined with the health of the regions in which our campuses are located. So the Pittsburgh campus, in the city of Pittsburgh, our local region is a 10-county southwestern Pennsylvania region. Our Bradford campus, certainly the city of Bradford, is its hyper-local place, but its local region extends beyond the border of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to include 4 counties in New York. However, understanding that deep context really is what enables us to achieve our mission. And so that mission, in part, is that we have a responsibility to contribute to the social, intellectual, and economic progress of the regions of which we are a part. And so that means then that our community engagement portfolio reflects contributions in each of those areas. And where I think we're advancing at this point is integrating those contributions. I'll tell you what I mean by that. On a social level, we have a huge opportunity to impact progress and community growth as it relates to our investment of talent and time. We have a significant staff workforce. We provide those staff with 1 day up to 1 day a month of paid time off for volunteerism. We have a thriving service learning set of classes that are really engaged with community partners. Our research enterprise is very much around working with community partners to discover new knowledge, just as all of my peers here today have elements of that on their campuses. So those intellectual contributions that we are making, it's not really in a vacuum. We're really thinking about that contextualized by place, the unique issues that are facing our regions, how we bring some of the talent, the intellectual endeavors that we've got to bear on those. And then the economic work that we do is really captured in how it is that we localize, and particularly do so through an equity lens, more of our purchasing, our construction, and our hiring. So that's really how the community engagement portfolio at the University of Pittsburgh is organized, to think about how it is that we're making contributions through each of those areas, always in partnership, and then further how we're integrating across those channels. So for me, Laurie, while I agree that the missions of each of our institutions give a particular sort of notion or a vehicle for how we deliver this, I think it's about any institution that's place focused, finds its way to understanding itself as an anchor institution. And from that comes a really deep and enduring commitment to the communities of which it's a part.
Nice. Laura, would you like to follow or add on to that?
Yeah, I love how Lena described it. I think the only thing I would add to that was really probably a lot of the history of many of our institutions really impacts how we engage. So Buffalo State started out in 1871 as a teacher training institution. So we were a normal, what was called a normal school, focused on training teachers for our immediate community. And so that fabric of connecting the institution with the schools in our area was really rooted in our founding and has maintained throughout Buffalo State's 150 years. We've always had that place-based approach. And as we grew beyond education into a comprehensive institution, it really, needled its way into the whole culture of the institution, no matter where you stood or where you sat on campus. And so we really have a broad fabric. I think we're at about 80% of our departments, for example, that have community engaged learning or have had at some point some community engaged learning. And so it really is a cultural choice of faculty on the ground, as well as student responsiveness to hands-on applied learning experiences in our community, as well as that institutional history and fabric of who we are. We are an institution located, in the city of Buffalo, the northwest corner of Buffalo, an extremely diverse community, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, but we do have a hyper local focus on our immediate neighborhood that we're embedded in as a result. So, the city is all around us, and we really try to break that down. And a lot of our students, our first generation students, come from extremely diverse backgrounds. One of the things that we're proudest of is our place on the Social Mobility Index. So this year we were ranked 34th out of 1,500 institutions in providing social mobility for our students. That's moving them up along that streamline of economic opportunity from where they started from and entering the institution to where they are as graduates. So that's something we're extremely proud of, and that's part of our mission as well. So I think all the things that everybody's talked about, the integration of these things across our strategic plan, across the master facilities plan, is really focused on institutional commitment to the work, as well as student engagement and the outreach and partnership work that really is a fabric of the institution that will be sustained for a long, long time as well.
Thanks for introducing the issue, I guess, or topic of history, because I think institutional history can and often maybe should play a role in like defining community engagement, whether that whether community engagement historically has been unpleasant, you know? I mean, I can think of a few institutions where maybe that the history of interacting with community has not been as productive as it should be, right? So thank you for that. So Craig and Ben, you're both at very different institutions from the three that we've heard from. How would you answer this question about institutional mission driving and or defining your institution's community engagement? And Ben, go ahead, and if you are whoever.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. No, I appreciate that. And the timing is great because I love hearing about, this is a very institutionally diverse panel. We've got different types of institutions, you're right. And that does affect sort of what and how we do. So Swarthmore, as you mentioned before, Laurie, has Quaker roots, and it's got a long tradition then of public engagement and activism. It really dates back, you mentioned history, dates back to the original Quaker founders, and many of them were staunch abolitionists. The institution's formal mission statement says that Swarthmore provides learners of diverse backgrounds a transformative liberal arts education, grounded in rigorous intellectual inquiry, and empowers all who share in our community to flourish and contribute to a better world. So for today's purposes, what stands out to me in that statement is diversity, rigorous inquiry, and contributing to a better world. So we try to do what we do through the lens of academic and intellectual inquiry. And that's partly because that's how we define ourselves. We're all about that, that sort of intense rigor is part of who we are. But also, it's worth noting we're a really fundamentally different kind of institution than the large public places. We're small. We're about 1,500 students on campus at any given time, maybe 175 tenure line faculty at any given time. And our school does not reside in one of the larger cities that we work with as partners. We're outside of the city of Chester, for example. We do a lot of work with Chester and have historically as well. And that's about a 12-minute bus ride or car ride from Swarthmore. And there's already a larger research university in Chester, Widener University. So we've got to look at what can we do. Even if we wanted to, we want to help the local communities, but our hiring that we do, and we do hire people from surrounding communities in Chester, but we're not going to be one of the major providers of jobs because of how small we are. So one of the things we try to do then is through this sort of rigorous inquiry, attach our scholarship, our teaching, our research to projects that will be useful to needs that are identified by community partners. The definition you gave of the anchor institution is really good and useful. Swarthmore, by those definitions, really isn't and couldn't be a true anchor institution. I sometimes use the term mini anchor, but really, because of who we are and the size that we are, I think a better metaphor, a more accurate one, would be a buoy institution, a floating buoy, that we try to lift up things, assets, efforts, resources that are already going on and efforts that are already happening, and try to do our part to elevate those things and work alongside them because we're not big enough to actually hold down economically a community in the way that you all have talked about thus far.
Well, I think I was thinking about that issue, the question of defining an anchor institution, and for me, I think about it broadly. It has to your definition of anchor or mini anchor has to be within the context of the community that the institution resides, right? Because I look at moving to Craig. I mean, I look at Hobart and William Smith, and they're relatively small and by enrollment, right? Small institution, and yet their community context really, almost defines them as an anchor institution, right? So Craig, how would you go ahead and how would you you answer this question?
Well, I appreciate being on the panel with all these folks, and we're just a little bigger than Swarthmore, but we do have a different context. So Hobart William Smith Colleges is one of the top employers, and sometimes close to the top employer in Geneva, New York, a city of 13,000 with a township around us as well. So looking at that and seeing that, we have a lot of power. And in fact, if you look at Ontario County, New York, which is beautiful and part of the Finger Lakes region of New York, we're also one of the top 10 employers. So that just says like the level of power we have and the level of scale and scope and size that we have. In fact, Geneva, New York, even though it does seem quite small, is a primarily human, like this is where the human service providers are located for New York State, for the county. And so this is the hub. We're at the tip of the Finger Lakes. And in fact, we're now becoming the sort of the tourism center of the Finger Lakes with our Finger Lakes Welcome Center that welcomes folks to the primarily wine and beer region, which is quite nice here. So it's a lovely place to live. I'm coming from the big city at Arizona State where I came from. But I would say recognizing that power and sort of our ingrained, I love the historical perspective. We've been around since, you know, the 1820s. Like this is, it's, you know, we're located in prime real estate in the city. And in fact, just sort of understanding those different dynamics, being ingrained in the community was essential. From our Geneva 2020 initiative that started in, which is a Cradle to Career Collective Impact Program that started in 2011, which now is the 2030 initiative, which is amazing. We have recognized that, you know, as many have noted, we are an anchor institution because literally if we went away, this place would sink a bit. And that's not ego, that's just power. That's employment power. That's our ingrainment in our tutoring programs in the different Finger Lakes region. That's our connection to human services. That's our connection to service and the different engagements. So I think what we're trying to do is really spend some time reflecting on that power and what does that mean to be an anchor institution, because it's not that, you know, in some ways we love it, but we didn't ask for it. So how do we make sure that our students are trained to be culturally competent? How do we make sure that our students are trained to even look beyond the notion of service learning? How do we start them at community-based learning, applied community learning experiences? How do we get them to understand with our motto, our institution's motto has nothing to do with community engagement, although it's filtered in, it's a part of it, but it's not directly in there. But our motto is to have students be prepared to live lives of consequence. And so I think if you think of that notion of power, of being an anchor institution, it's not just about like living lives of consequence where you go out and do good, but it's also being aware of the harm that one could do if things aren't done right. And so I think we're really thoughtful and really mindful of that, and having our wonderful Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning and a number of faculty that I'm the faculty liaison for that center, getting on board is just essential to making sure not that we create barriers and roadblocks to engagement, but that we are ensuring that we are doing good as well as not doing harm.
Craig, I'm really interested in what you just said. I think that this is always a matter of concern for me. I think we probably interface with that obligation to have effective, respectful, culturally centered collaborators, maybe a little differently than you all in the sense of our scope and scale. So we're coming from a large institutional context. While we do have a pretty robust programs and training offering through our office that's reaching a good number of staff and faculty, the just sheer number of individuals that are engaging in our broader communities is significant. And where I could see us learning something from you is how you bring a collective impact lens to that. Could you maybe share a little bit more about the way that collective impact and some of that preparation for positive engagement kind of interface?
Yeah, I mean, I would just point to folks to really look at our Geneva 2030, just Google it, it's wonderful. But this notion of action teams and the action teams that are connected, it was really essential. And as we all know, and maybe some of us have been put in a part of, who's going to be in charge? How is this going to work? And so the notion of Hobart and Smith colleges under our leadership of Mark Guerin, who is now back at the colleges, which is wonderful, was really focused on, we will be recognizing that power that we hold in communities. We will be that center because we really need this. But I will say that we have a lot of room for growth. So this program is wonderful from cradle to career. It's had great success regarding literacy. It's had great success in many ways. However, we are now recognizing I'm an assistant professor of management and entrepreneurship, associate professor starting in July. But looking at how we are connected to the workforce here, there's a number of different workforce entities from IBERO, which is mostly focused on Latinx and people of color, raising them up to be entrepreneurs, from that uses the SCORE program. You're looking at other folks we had a co-working space that just shut down. We're looking at, here we have a Chamber of Commerce. We have all these different development corporations and folks that are trying to lift people up. And it's just not there yet to get people to that next level. And so I think it's really, really exciting to say, okay, we have a strong relationship with the school district. We have a strong capacity there, and we have models. Thank you to Strive Together for that collective impact model. But I think we are ready, and we're almost ready. We do have an anchor person, which is helpful in our office, by the way. in our Cecil office to be our person for this, which is really helpful. However, we're ready to start moving to the next direction, because what we're getting feedback on an institutional level is, why aren't you hiring more people from the Finger Lakes region? Or what is keeping people to stay? Or how do you ensure diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in these different things? So it's really exciting that's our problem, if you will. Like, I look at it as the opportunity, but I appreciate what you just said. Thank you so much. I think that we can't just like have it one way. It's got to be a lot of things that we have to consider where we are socially positioned, our positionality in this aspect.
Well, and what you just said, Craig, it reminds me that, often we forget that institutional development it's affected by, it's an organic process, right? It should be anyway. You should, kind of learn from your mistakes and learn from your successes and adjust accordingly. So that's really good. Before we move on, anybody have a thank you for introducing the conversational aspect to what we're striving for, Lena? Anybody else have any comments or questions for each other before we move on? All right, I will take your silence as a no. So one of the things I was thinking about when thinking about the composition of this panel is sort of how the immediate sociopolitical environments shape an institution's capacity for and ability or interest in connecting with communities. And so my next question for everybody here is, how does the immediate geographic and socioeconomic context, right? Urban versus rural, thriving region versus declining region that your institution is kind of situated in, how does that affect the depth and also the variety of institutional engagement? Yeah, and just jump in before I call on somebody. I mean, what's interesting for me about that that the context is, Swarthmore is in a pretty thriving urban region. Buffalo and Pittsburgh and Erie have had their share of challenges as cities, right? It's great to see more thriving in each of these urban environments. And, Hobart and William Smith is I think, a pretty surrounded by rural, right? So go ahead. Ben, you've got your mic off or on or whatever.
It's a really interesting thing. And Craig, we are really exciting comments about all that has been done at a small institution in I think, a relatively small town. Geneva is under 15,000, or no, is it more than that? But so it was extremely exciting. And it's not just the larger places that can really be anchors in that sort of way. So it's great to have this question following to give a little more context for what I'm saying. One of the blessings we've had is being being proximate to so many different vibrant opportunities for engaging with communities. I mean, we're geographically in a small suburban borough, and our campus actually is an arboretum, but we are, like I said before, 12 minutes away from Chester. That's a longtime partner, and that's a smaller but urban center of maybe 37,000 people. But a 25-minute train ride from Philadelphia, 30 minutes from Camden, New Jersey, under 2 hours from New York, Washington, D.C., and the state capital of Harrisburg, and within 2 hours of a lot of areas of rural Pennsylvania, which have very different kinds of communities and concerns, where a number of our faculty and students do research as well. And we have classes and research opportunities focused in those different areas. We've got something called the Chester Semester, which is a semester-long course designed by us and also by Chester Community Partners residents that also has a year-long internship. And it's something similar that we do with the tri-college system. That's Bryn Mawr and Haverford also. and Swarthmore that's Trico Philly, where there are students take multiple classes in Philadelphia that are Philly oriented and do other kinds of activities with that. As well, that the mission statement that we had stressed that we're trying to create a better world. And so we actually have a kind of a global orientation too. And we send students to do projects with communities all over the world. Now, that's all terrific, but it also does, everything's got a trade-off. So we love being able to send students to all the places I just mentioned. And we have a train pass system now coming in where the students can actually get to Philadelphia when they want to. But the trade-off is it's more diffuse. The impact that we have, as opposed to, as Craig is beautifully describing, the really meaningful anchoring you're able to do with Geneva. So we've traditionally had a kind of a global orientation. We have a lot of very strong partners in Chester, but it's not the same kind of thing that Craig is describing and others are describing. And that's why I love hearing more about what y'all are doing to give us ideas for it too.
I'll jump in. Laurie, I appreciate that you're pointing us toward our regions. And I want to highlight that there's great disparity within the Southwestern Pennsylvania region. So whether you mark this area as thriving or declining, which you can variously, by the way, if you look at our population, it either stagnates or loses. But when you think about our sort of regional economic growth and the new industry sectors that are coming in, some might point to a bit of thriving, it disproportionately is available to people. And so in our area, our university, along with the other density of colleges and university in Pittsburgh, by which there's many of us, we are in large measure really lauded for the role that universities and colleges played in the post-industrial decline era of Southwestern Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, that we moved from very steel-based, very industry-based economy to an eds and meds economy. And in that, stabilized the region and perhaps have included some growth opportunities. And so that needs to be balanced with the realities of what it is to be, let's say, a Black mother in the city of Pittsburgh. We just recently, within the last 3 years, went through a commission report, a gender equity commission report, really citing that our maternal health and child health outcomes for Black mothers in the city of Pittsburgh are abysmal, deplorable, and yet we have one of the strongest healthcare systems in the nation. And so to the institution, it's our responsibility. We see this as our responsibility to leverage our engaged scholarship and our partnerships to be of resource across disparity. Another way that shows up for us in terms of how we're sort of related to the region is that, we are a life sciences powerhouse at the University of Pittsburgh, and there's a life sciences corridor emerging in Southwestern Pennsylvania. My office and our partners see uniquely our role as translating regional economic opportunity to opportunity at the neighborhood and community scale. And that is very difficult to do. But really, when you look at regional transformation, individuals and neighborhoods at the neighborhood scale are frequently left out of that opportunity. So through our Community Engagement Centers initiative, which are deeply hyperlocal, neighborhood invested centers where we're bridging partnerships between all 17 schools at the university and various community-based organizations, resident associations, we're doing really important work to help start to make those translations possible. The last thing I'll offer is that, relevant to the life sciences corridor, we're deeply embedded in the greater Hazelwood neighborhood, thinking about how we make very real opportunities in pre-K-12 education, workforce development, and inclusive community development that are catalyzed by the idea that the heart of the life sciences corridor is happening here. And it's happening on a previous steel mill site, right? It is an absolute beautiful image of where this region has come. And yet, we can walk a couple of blocks and recognize that opportunity is not going to be made available for everyday individuals unless it is actively crosswalked. And we can only do that in collaboration with our community partners and our systems intermediaries, our governmental partners, our public school district partners, our human services partners. So that's how I see the sort of benchmarking to thriving or declining regional economies and how that steers some of our community engagement work.
Wow, lots of really cool work going on, and anytime I start listening, I have 100 things in my head, but we don't have time for 100 of them. I'm not even sure I can process them all. But this whole, where Gannon is as an urban institution geographically, some of the things that I was just hearing, your impact, your power, your size to some degree does have to do with the size of the community that you're in. So University of Pittsburgh is larger than a Gannon, but Pittsburgh is larger than Erie. Gannon is 3-4 times the size of Hobart and Swarthmore, but Erie is probably 4 or 5 times the size of, so power and impact can be influenced by how big an institution you are and the size of the population you're trying to impact. A lot of how we are trying to move forward over the last 10 or 15 years, we're an urban institution. So our roads in our campus are the city streets of Erie. There are no roads in our campus. We have no closed campus. Our neighbors don't live 12 miles away. They live about 17 steps away. And we have 30+% poverty 3 blocks from some of our buildings, and our students are living in those neighborhoods, hundreds of them, and our own residence halls are in those neighborhoods. So when I came in 2005, I used to hear, so as Gannon goes, so as Erie goes, and there's that power sense to how huge an impact Gannon has on the community. I very quickly reminded that humility and responsibility goes along with power and impact. But humility, I have turned that very quickly to, so as Erie goes, so as Gannon goes. Yes, to some degree, it's the other way around. But if we don't stand up, and I love Ben's buoy, I'm going to steal that one, Ben, buoy institution. But if we don't lift up our community, we're in trouble as much, if not more so, than the community is in trouble. So we're also right on the bay. So my office is on 6th Street. Our closest is 3rd Street to Presque Isle Bay. So we have opportunities to do all kinds of things because we're not the size of a Pitt or probably a Buff State, but we have an order of magnitude where we have some robustness, and we've got programs all the way from engineering to health professions to, we have kind of an R1 distribution of programs. We just don't have the several $100 million or $1 billion endowment to drive us forward with some of those things. But when we look at what we're going to do, we have tried to focus over the last 15 years and been criticized many times for that. So we've taken on what we've created Erie Gains about 15 years ago, and it's Erie Gannon Alliances to Improve Neighborhood Sustainability. So that was kind of the programmatic, how do we focus our programs, our research, our academic programs, our outreach programs, but we're doing that in our neighborhoods that are right adjacent to Gannon's campus. Now that is about a quarter of the city of Erie that we've taken on. And I always joke that in downtown Erie, there's 3 major anchor institutions. There's Gannon, there's UPMC Hammett, which is a multi-billion-dollar organization. There's Erie Insurance, which is a Fortune 500 institution. So I say the 2 multi-billion-dollar corporations, they handle the east side, and Gannon, little Gannon, is trying to take on the whole west side of the city. But when we decided that we needed to focus on our west bayfront, and we created a 501c3 about 7-8 years ago to try and work on blight and the whole variety of issues that go along with poverty and a declining urban series of neighborhoods, there was this, but we're doing so much work on the east side, and the east side is where the higher poverty is. Yeah, instead of 35% poverty, it's 40. And I say, as a Catholic institution, I'm pretty sure God is going to be okay that I'm helping out the people that are in 30% poverty instead of 40% poverty. But we got a lot of criticism. Now, we still work with all kinds of organizations, but we've had to focus geographically because our students can walk to the schools and the community schoolwork that we're doing with the United Way. The students can walk out into the neighborhoods and do mentoring and tutoring and do the kinds of things, as opposed to getting them in a car or a bus or whatever to move them to the opposite side of the city. We've also had to choose areas. So we've started Neptune, which is a water sustainability project that has lots of arms to it. One is going to be a new research and education center that we're putting in a facility right down on the bay. And it will be the only building down there. Everything around it has been ripped down. And they're like, well, you sure that's what we really need down there? Because we need to engage the community. Well, we will be not just building a research center, it'll be a community education center. And my comment is, let us be the cornerstone of the development of that, as opposed to the tooth that got stuck in the middle and you don't know what to do around it. Let us be the lead. Let us come down into this bayfront space and start something that can grow from there. So we're on the water, and so we focused on water and sustainability. We're right outside my window is Perry Square, which is the center square of Erie. Well, Erie Downtown Development Corporation, Gannon is a founding member and I'm on the board. Erie Downtown Partnership, which is the programmatic side of the downtown revitalization. I'm on the board, and Gannon was one of the founders with the city of Erie, the Erie Regional Chamber and Growth Partnership. So we're working on urban renewal and economic development drivers in helping to build the physical spaces and drive the programming to bring people from the region into downtown Erie. And then from an economic development and a growth, business growth perspective, we've had a small business development center in SBDC for 35 years. We added to that about 15 years ago an Erie Technology Incubator, which we've kind of spun off as a separate 501c3. We've got a Beehive network, which is a business development network that we work with Penn State Barron and Mercyhurst University and Edinburgh in a kind of an entrepreneurial access to services. And now we just launched our Institute for Health and Cyber Knowledge, which is in one of the many buildings that we've picked up, was a GTE and a Verizon building. One is now our health professions facility, and IHAC is, we bought the building, and we've now already spent about $28 million renovating the space into not only academic spaces, but a hatchery with an open access to GIS mapping center, which is deeply connected into the research that's happening in our community, as well as our cybersecurity, cyber engineering, and relationships with not just local businesses, but global businesses, where our students are working for businesses from IHAC in businesses across the world. So we're trying to drive business growth, economic growth. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that we've picked a few spots and we said, we're going deep into the water. We're going deep into IHAC and business development. We're going deep into health professions and the engineering side of things, because I don't think at an institution our size, we have the bandwidth to try and take on everything. We've taken on our neighborhoods, and we've taken on some 3 or 4 really large initiatives, but we can't do everything.
That is a hard act to follow, and Lena put a comment to the panelists in there that leadership matters, right? And as a university president, it's really inspiring to hear you so committed to the mission of Gannon as an anchor in your community. And to hear some of those projects is fantastic. Buffalo State has a similar leader that was originally asked to be on the panel, so I'm sitting in her place, Dr. Catherine Conway Turner, who is retiring from Buffalo State, has been a driver for our anchor mission as well. And here at Buffalo State, we really see ourselves with that anchor mission as a backbone, right? If we think about that collective impact model that Lena was talking about, we aim to be a backbone for community-driven initiatives. So there are 18 higher education institutions in Western New York within 50 miles of downtown Buffalo. That's a lot of higher ed. That's a lot, I brought up history before, so that's a lot of history of higher ed, collaborating with the community. And when we first started our initiative 20 years ago, we heard a lot about that history. That was, as Laurie mentioned, was not always positive. There were a lot of, swooping in and getting what people needed and swooping out. And so in hearing that over the years and trying to always be responsive to the community-driven leadership that is really, really strong in Buffalo, we've intentionally worked to respond, as everyone does, but not necessarily to always lead, to be that backbone supporter, to be that, the anchor or the buoy to help the community-driven efforts succeed. And that's really been a priority of us in this. Buffalo, similar to what we just heard about Erie, has roughly 3 in 10 individuals living in poverty in the city. We are currently the 6th most segregated city in the country. And that leads to many, many challenges in our community. We have so many assets, but we do have significant challenges. One that's coming up for us in the moment, this is coming up on a year from the racist shooting in our East Side neighborhood that killed 10 last May 14th. And that is a huge focus for our community right now. And Buffalo State has found ways to assist with that reflection process, with that responsiveness process, facilitating a 1-year conversation on racism in our community, for example. We've had students and faculty working to support the preservation of pictures and flowers and mementos that were at the site last year. So really that I think what I'm just trying to say is we respond, not lead. And it's interesting to hear the different perspectives. Buffalo also has a huge, huge immigrant and refugee population in our city. 24% of all refugees who come into New York State are coming to Buffalo. There are 40 languages spoken in one of our partner high schools alone, which is just about 6 or 8 blocks from campus. And that's also been a huge focus of ours, is to support our refugee community. And so some of the ways in which that geographic and that social and that economic impact has influenced how we engage, it really is some outreach efforts. So identifying 10 years ago the need for additional supports for our refugee neighbors, we created what's called the Community Academic Center, which up until the pandemic was a brick and mortar facility in the community with doors open, and offers adult and youth education programs, a lot of English language learning programs, supports for individuals preparing to take the US citizenship test, and after school initiatives that come out of our CAC. We're also a backbone of what's called the West Side Promise neighborhood. We don't lead that, we are a member, but we house, and it's a collaboration of community organizations, businesses, community leaders, schools in our immediate neighborhood. And the 2 backbone supporters are Buffalo State and what's Rich Products, a Fortune 500 institution company here in Buffalo. They provide the funding for a coordinator position. We house that person here on campus and provide the benefits. So it's a collaborative effort that some of our small nonprofits wouldn't necessarily be able to, take on that. But everything that comes out of the West Side Promise neighborhood is, driven by our community core leadership team. And so those are some pretty critical ways in which we kind of live that in response to some of the context that our community's in.
Good. Craig, anything to add?
I mean, I think it's just really important to balance, like you said, where do you lead? Where do you not? Where is the response? And I think just being a small school, taking leadership where we can is great, but many of the people that we have that are part of, from faculty to students, are not from the area. So they lack the cred of being from there. And I do think that we are trying to move towards a greater understanding of what does it mean to be a modern, smaller, liberal arts residential education place. And so really trying to understand that and how that relates to your neighbors, right, who have lived with fraternities and sororities on their main street for years, to relating to your neighbors who have met their children have met your students through tutoring at the Boys and Girls Club. Trying to understand those different dynamics is really, really key, while also creating like a kind of a cultural shift in the region, which is, yes, quite rural, but now kind of the epicenter of tourism in the summer, which is really, really interesting. So we're seeing a number of younger folks, from those who have graduated from HWS moving back to the area, from faculty members wanting to live in the area, like myself. I live down the street. I'm actually at our downtown incubator space right now. I think it's really, really exciting to see what's happening, but that thoughtfulness and that consideration, without sort of saying like, we're going to take over the narrative and the story, is really, really key. And so I'm excited. Like we have a model. We use the Compass model from, you start at service and you move up from engagement to leadership to civic participation. And I'm excited when I see students who, not that they need to, but when they've gone through different programs or different experiences, curricularly, co-curricularly, extracurricularly, and that they want to stay and that they fall in love with the area. Now, that's not necessarily the goal, but it is one way to lead a life of consequence, which I think is really, really exciting. So that's probably my main ad. I think there's a lot of just other things to pay attention to, but knowing that we don't have the capacity to solve Geneva's problems, but together working with different groups, we do. And that's it. To just finally hit one point that wasn't noted, being in a more rural area right now, most of the work we do is with associations that are hubbed in the center that service that rural area. I think that because we do have Cornell just up the road, the Cornell Extension campus, which is wonderful. They do a lot of work with the farmers and we have great partnerships with them. But I think there's opportunities for a little bit more directness and that connection. However, we shouldn't just jump into it without learning from those who have gone before us on how to do it right.
I'm going to throw you guys a little bit of a curveball, so I apologize for this, but I want to pick up on Lena's comment about leadership. I've been curious or interested in observing, watching institutions that have strong community-oriented leadership, and what occasionally happens when those strong sort of personalities move on and it's a different kind of leader. I'd like you all to reflect on the importance of leadership, and how is there a way that institutional history and current work can balance a change in leadership? Laura mentioned that's her case. Dr. Conway Turner is retiring. Keith, I know that you have different plans for the future. You're not going to be a president for life. Craig, I know Hobart and William Smith has had some presidential challenges in the recent past. So yeah, please, I really would love to hear your reflections on this leadership question.
Can I jump in?
Please, absolutely.
I think institutional leadership is important. I think transitions are important, and sometimes can go very well and sometimes don't go as well as one would hope. We've been blessed to build a culture across all levels of our institution. So if the institutional culture truly is infused into everything you do and how you do it, I'm not going to say that leadership matters less, but when the faculty member understands what it is we're trying to do and why community engagement and why commitment to our neighbors is important, it takes less leadership further up the chain, because you do a lot less convincing and you do a lot less educating people about how they could have designed their course or how they could have spent their weekend, or because the community that's just how you do things. So your original question about mission, to me, if you truly live your mission as an institution, leadership is more about building the culture. It's about supporting the culture. It's about convincing people that this is a calling more than a job. Students, that it's more about how you do what you do than it is sometimes what you do. So, leadership is important, but I think if you can have continuity from one president to the next, we built a succession plan. And so the new president, July 1, is the current provost. And I'm not saying that that should happen at every institution, but if you've done a good job in developing your deans and developing your CFO and developing your provost and developing people so that they're ready for whatever that next step is, the likelihood that the frequency of continuity is going to be there goes up. So sometimes the next person is not quite ready at the right time. Okay, well, then you do a search and you bring other people in. But when you bring a new leader in, when a new leader is being interviewed by a culture that knows what they're looking for, the likelihood that the next leader that comes fits and is what the institution needs, I think, is much higher. So to me, the biggest thing in leadership really is about driving culture, having people understand the saga of the institution, being committed to the values as much as the objectives. And then I am a crazy strategy execution guy. So, I mean, if you have strong plans, they usually sustain past whoever the person is that's sitting in place. So leadership matters, but it's a team sport. No one person really makes that huge a difference, no matter where they are on the chain. It's how do you get everyone, and the collective impact is the key to it all.
How would some of the rest of you, and Ben?
Just a brief thing, because well, mostly in respect, Keith's got so much vastly more experience and knowledge about this as having been a president. I just want to suggest that probably we've all seen it happen at institutions that have had successful community engagement with a change of leadership at the top. If that top person or people's commitments are not there, it doesn't continue. So maybe I could extend, I think what you're saying, Keith, is that it may be necessary but not sufficient to have the leadership invested in the community engagement. I think it's very difficult if faculty and students want to do community engagement. If a new person comes in at the top and says, we're not doing that, it's difficult to maintain that, because people can clean house, and we've seen it happen. One thing that is so great in hearing about what's happening in these different schools here is that schools committed community engagement, and Laurie PCCE too, as an organization committed to that, can put out the news that you can do well by doing good. The more schools who are succeeding and thriving in their own missions and in terms of enrollments and the health of their institutions by doing this kind of thing, the more it's more difficult for a new person to come in at some other place and say, well, I'm pulling back entirely, because it's a demonstrated model that's worked. So it's difficult without the leadership at the top if you don't have them as well.
I'm just going to jump back in and agree with you. To me, the top leadership is the board and the trustees. And in most institutions, if not all, they're the ones that hire the next leader. And that next leader, if you have a real understanding from your board of what your mission is, what you're looking for, what leadership looks like, it's critical to hire that right person that's the right fit for your institution in where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. So I 100% agree, which is why the risk of hiring new people in from the outside is always, an interview process is only so good. You don't really know what the heart of that human being is until you've lived with them for a while. So the board, and doing a really deep work in determining who the president is important, but I think it's about fit. And yeah, if you hire somebody that doesn't fit, isn't where you are, and doesn't have an institutional understanding that community engagement should be the center, then that's probably not what you're going to get on the other end.
I have
Yeah,
a
and
couple of thoughts that I'll offer.
Thank you.
Laura, did I just overtalk you? If you want to head right in there, you go right ahead.
No, go ahead. You go first, Lena.
So I do appreciate the points that have been raised. I think there's a couple of other factors at work for me around sustainability past leadership transitions. One of those is I come from an orientation where I don't think we advocate community engagement. We should not be advocating community engagement as a practice unto itself, that rather it's the way that we do the work of universities. It's the way that we do our teaching, our research, the way that we do placemaking, right, is by being engaged with our broader communities. And sometimes I think I see this in the fields that we're a part of, is that sometimes we're really holding on so tightly to a particular instantiation of the way that we've been engaged with communities. And that is very vulnerable to leadership transitions. But if there's a little bit more of a flexibility of letting go of that and instead sort of understanding there's an ethos, a set of principles that guide us, that we're in conversation with communities, we have a particular role that we play, and this is how we get our work done. I think that starts to moderate that a little bit. The second thing that comes to mind is the role of community engagement professionals on these campuses. And I'm particularly thinking a lot about Laura and Craig in this conversation. So I'm very familiar with Laura's work. Craig and I are meeting for the first time today, but the languaging, the longstanding commitments that they've made to place is really critical to sustaining the kind of work that happens. So, Craig used a lot of the language of power, and that kind of power analysis, he is interjecting that into the model at his institution in a way that really helps to inflect a particular ethos. Laura's history and her years of being in that space and place starts to inflect into her institution a sustainability that's really important. And what we know about community engagement professionals is that you can have a mandate from leadership to be engaged with the broader community, but if you don't have a set of people steering the ethos behind that, it tends not to take root, right? It tends not to take hold. The third thing and the last thing I'll offer is this. There's also a value in having involvement and proximity amongst the people that make up the institution to the ongoing civic life of the community. That's a heady way of saying, like, our faculty and staff and students need to be really authentically involved in our communities, not sort of as that us them sort of, this is an intellectual exercise, but as I'm familiar with the Pitt context, my colleagues who are deeply invested in this work serve on boards. They are in the conversations every day. Our staff are similarly, our students are coming from communities that we are engaging. That set of connections is so important. And I think if we're absent those, it's really easy to sort of start to see this disintegrate. The relationship gets further and further apart.
Laura, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, being in the beginning stages, middle stages of a presidential search, the things that Keith was talking about are critical, from our college council on down through, tomorrow there's an open forum with the search committee. We try to encourage, people who are committed to the work, not just in our office, but the faculty that embed this work in their scholarship and teaching, to make sure that voice is heard in that process, so that it's not just written into the position description, but the search firm hears it over and over. The college council is reminded of the mission. The candidates, when they're coming to campus, we want to make sure that we're asking questions of the candidates about their commitment to that. So in the open forum, so it's all taken into consideration, and not just coming from one area, but as others have said, is really infused across the institution in the variety of ways that people embrace that. And I guess just in response to Lena's comment about leadership of directors and those that are running centers and things, I used to think up until a handful of years ago that if I ever left the institution, I worried that this work might stop. I don't anymore. Between the amazing team I have implementing this work here in the office and the way that it has fully infused and presented itself in academic departments and other offices that talk about these things, I'm always amazed when we just did strategic planning. I was not the one, and my team was not the one to say, we're a community engaged institution. I was like, wow, who's that? And and it's just so great to see that it's decentralized now at our institution, and that is another form of leadership that, you know, both from our president and from our office, that we've really tried to embrace. It can't sit in one place. It needs to be fully integrated across the institution.
All right, I love this. So I like the decentralization. I like the faculty staff. So I'm going to go flip side alternative, but I want to riff on a few things. First, absolutely, the culture is imperative. We are so lucky to have Mark Gierenbeck as our president, a epitome of leadership and what it means to be publicly engaged. And so that's exciting. However, I have worked at this wonderful colleges for 7 years, and I've had multiple new provosts and presidents. So what keeps it going? What happens? Well, some of it is the history. Programs that have been around a long time, even COVID can't take down. It's really interesting to see what we can do and how we can pivot and innovate, and really exciting there. However, I would like to speak to like an old adage by this nerdy sociologist Granovetter, who talked about the strength of weak ties. I'm really like having this moment of just our Hobart hockey, our men's hockey team won the Division III championship, and to see this city, not just our campus, come alive because of where it's located in the Geneva Ice Complex. Just seeing the changes as we're moving beyond COVID, you're seeing this like notion, but what is happening? Well, what is happening is people are coming together. And what I love about the strength and smallness that we have at Hobart and William Smith colleges is that when I have a question about what something needs to be made out of, I just call my friends in chemistry. Or when I want to know, like, who are the people to work with, or what are the challenges we should consider, there are wonderful folks from all across campus that we can talk to. And many of us live in town. We run into each other. We sit at the same pubs, the coffee shops, and we get projects. I was at it wasn't even a formal meeting, and I ran into the school superintendent, and he said, we're still having trouble getting bus drivers. And then I said, is this a you problem? Is this a national problem? He said, yes, this is an everybody problem. I said, great. What if my students in our management and entrepreneurship program and our social innovation class got to work on that as a project? He said, anything will help at this point. And I just really appreciate this strength and smallness of running into each other. And if you have that built into the culture, and yes, modeled from the top, but in the ethos of the institution, and the tight proximity also helps, and also good coffee and beer helps too, and wine, it can be really fun. And I think it's exciting because the risks of saying yes to some of these small projects, from being in the classroom to being volunteering through our Cecil office, to even just being a quick days of service project, let's get people out and see how the students do working in this particular community garden, is just incredible. And so, I mean, I came from the big city of Phoenix, Arizona. And so seeing what can be done, like I just run into the city manager all the time. Like, it's just obnoxious on how like fast things can move in a small place when people like each other, when they work together, when they break bread together. It's really fascinating and really fun.
The role of food in bringing people together to, work out problems. Yeah. We have a question from the audience, and I'm going to try to paraphrase this. And I'm going to put it in the chat. I think I can do this. So, yes. So, given that this particular person, and hi, Heather, it's good to know you're on the call, that they lost a student. There was a student death as a result of police shooting. And the question really comes down to how do your institutions deal with the complexity of advocacy and service in light of a maybe particular or set of circumstances that are adverse?
I would love to start with that one if everybody else doesn't mind. I mentioned the top shooting in Buffalo last year that took 10 lives. Our city in the past year alone has faced a lot of challenges. We had a blizzard in December that took 37 lives. We had 2 campus emergencies last spring. A bomb threat was one, and a stabbing at a high school. We have a creek on one side of our campus, Gajakwita Creek it's called. There's a high school just across the creek, and there was a stabbing that resulted in a lockdown on campus last spring. So that happened in February, the bomb threat in April, the shooting in May, a fire that destroyed a refugee entrepreneurship center happened in the fall. If anybody watches football, Damar Hamlin, a beloved Buffalo Bill, suffered cardiac arrest, and then the blizzard in December. So we're hoping 2023 will be a little bit easier on our community, but I guess I'll start even further back. We have an institution that has a majority minority student body. Our faculty and staff, including myself, are not representative of our student body. It's resulted in a lot of conversations on our campus about that, stemming from students expressing a concern about, not feeling represented. Those conversations resulted in, this is, years ago, resulted in kind of an informal social justice focused conversation that faculty and staff were part of, but students really initiated. After the George Floyd murder, that conversation ramped up even more. There was a very large Black Lives Matter protest in Buffalo throughout our city in summer 2020. And the conversation on campus was really, how do we as an institution become involved in that, be representative, be that backbone that I mentioned. And over time, I guess I'll speed up my conversation a little bit, but all of those conversations have resulted in a social justice action plan that now is open. We're opening a social justice center. The first faculty coordinator was just appointed this spring. We'll be focusing on curriculum as the first step of that social justice center, as well as faculty and staff training in partnership with our Equity and Campus Diversity Office. So I'm not answering that question directly, but I think what I would say through all of the trauma that we've faced on our campus and in our community is, again, that we need to listen. We need to listen to our students. We need to listen to our community. We need to understand that we have strengths and resources that can be mobilized in response to what we hear. And then we have the responsibility to act in response to the extent of concerns, what's driving community concern and problem, and addressing those. And again, it's unique in our situation, but not to be the driver, but to be the responder in those situations. So I guess that's my take on things.
That aspect of listening, I think, harks back to Keith's earlier comments about humility, about approaching challenges from a sense of just deep humility. Keith.
Yeah, sometimes I don't make friends with my comments, but Laura, I'll go to a few things that are very similar in that the diversity on our campus has now, between our domestic racial diversity, we have 4,700 students. The domestic population is about 3,700 students, and we're about 20% racial minorities at this point. We then have 1,000 global students from 70 countries. So overall, we have almost 40% of our population is either culturally or racially diverse in a very significant way. So on our own campus, we have for the better part of a decade, as we've been intentionally becoming more global in the way we view ourselves and the way we are, those conversations have been going on and had all of the challenges that come with it. I mean, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but really not ugly like mean ugly, just difficult is probably a better word. We, after the George Floyd incident, we started instead of DEI, we wanted justice in there. So of course, Keith said JEDI, well, let's just call it JEDI. So we have a JEDI initiative. And along the way, over the last few years, there has been a big push for me in particular, not from me, but for me, and for the university to put out statements and make public proclamations about where we stand and what we believe about this issue or that institution or what's right and wrong in the world. I've resisted that. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, but there are some on campus that felt like we should be more actively involved in the political sphere and the sphere of what's going on in our community and on broader issues. I feel very strongly that we need to build awareness, understanding, and good communication and conversation in our Gannon community, so that we are about, in my mind, helping grow globally, socially responsible global citizens. So it's not that I don't have an opinion. It's not that Gannon shouldn't have an opinion, but not only are the complexities of a Catholic institution, the bishop is the chairman of my board, so there's lots of things that can create, and the bishop is awesome. So I have no complaints, been blessed, but we have focused on ensuring that our internal dialogue and the opportunities for communication on our campus are robust and that we're willing to have really difficult conversations. But when many of these things have come up, people often look and they say, why is there not people more upset? Why is there not more unrest? Why does your campus not have protests? It's not that we don't have passion. It's that the faculty and administration see ourselves, by and large, as one. I mean, we're working together. The students believe and trust that we care and we're listening. And we have forums every month out of the provost's office, every month out of my office, every month, campus-wide forums. And then we have student forums. Our dialogue is very robust, but we've focused on kind of developing our family, building our internal family. A lot of that dialogue and a lot of the topics come from things that are happening clearly outside the university. And when there's a need, and again, one of your comments, Laura, and then I'll stop, when things happen in the community, not only the Gannon community, it's been a very difficult year on our campus. We've had 4 student deaths, 2 suicides, 1 student drowned, and another one was killed in a car accident in 1 year. For us, that was 7 years of deaths. We had 4 employees die, current employees die. 1 was bitten and killed by a shark. Just things just blow your mind. What could have happened? We had them this year. Our community comes together. But then clearly, as other cities do, we've got unrest and things that are happening right around us. We acknowledge those. We work when we need to. We reach out and we're involved. I'm involved in the mayor's dialogue. I'm involved with city council. So it's not that we're not participating, but I think we are kind of like keeping our own internal family, our own internal shop in a healthy place. And then when we think that there's something that we truly can have an impact on, we have a voice, we use that voice. So, some are less pleased with me because I don't use my voice more often. And I don't use what they think should be a pulpit of power. That's not who I am. And maybe the next guy will be, going back to our other question, but it's not where I've lived or driven.
I know there's a brief comment, Laurie. We know we want to get some more things in, short on time, but I appreciate, Keith, what you're saying. Heather, it's a really eloquently framed question. And I just want to say, actually, Swarthmore, our president, Val Smith, an African-American woman who was actually one of my college professors when I was in college, taught me Toni Morrison for the first time. But she has spoken out on certain issues, but always in a way that isn't targeting, let's say, the police or this president or so on, but at a larger stance on the societal thing and committing us to work on that. And that's, I think, because she's recognized that what she does, speak out against injustice, but the way that you framed it, Heather, which is that we have relationships we've got to maintain as well. That happens with us. When we're representing the institution, we can hurt our own prospects for being able to work with communities based on some things we might do. So as a private citizen, I'm active in some politics in the region in a way that I cannot even hint at doing when I'm representing the college. And there are communities and where the politicians view Swarthmore suspiciously because they think that we're out of step with them, the elected officials. When I do inside out prison pedagogy, take my students into, I muted for a second accidentally. When I take my students in prisons, I have had to swallow my tongue on issues that were very disturbing to me, things that were happening with staff in the prison, but knowing that our access would be cut off if I actually spoke my mind as a representative of the college. So it is fraught. And I usually try to keep in mind the larger picture of what we want to accomplish, but I don't know, others might have, other and more directly principled stances.
Quickly, before we try to answer the last question in record time, either any more comments with regard to the specific question?
I do want to offer that I think that there is, at least in my institutional context, an ability to have advocacy and action coming from within faculty scholarship. And I'm not just sort of in a mechanistic way trying to tie this back to engaged scholarship, but the role of academic freedom here is powerful and important. And so we have many of our scholars whose bodies of work relate to very contemporary, very hard issues that are facing our communities and are situated in ways where that work can move into the fore. There are also entities within the institution that are very focused on how they are supporting and I would say guiding and resourcing thoughtful student advocacy, right? Helping our students to come into the fore around diverse perspectives. And so in that, we've got to lean into where those centers of voice and advocacy are. It may not be that my center or my office is the right mover in that moment on a particular issue. There are others for which we are absolutely the right mover. So I agree very much, Ben, that the question is thoughtfully posed, but I think for me, this is also about contextualizing the engagement infrastructure amidst an entire larger institutional context and allowing for where there is expertise and already existing avenues of action to be in the spaces that they need to be in.
Totally agree. That's beautifully said. Yeah.
Craig, did you want to add in?
Yeah, as an educator, I just feel like it's just too bad that so much politics gets in the way of things. And I try to get our students to think about, how do you find commonalities together? We have a lot of issues with food insecurity in our city. We could all agree that kids shouldn't be starving or malnourished. Like, like this is, police violence and wrongful deaths are horrific. How do we address this? So I think that there are ways to come together. And I think that the notion, though, to think that advocacy and service are separate, I think we have to challenge ourselves to figure out that for ourselves and for our scholarship and for our teaching and for our service in our programs. Because I edit a journal called Community Development, and if you ever want to publish, shameless plug. But we are challenged by that often by scholars of where did these two go together and must they be separate? And to me, the notion of engagement, especially public engagement, requires not a balance between the two, but a holistic understanding of both. And so I also just, what worries me is when we think that we can academically solve this problem, because oftentimes it can come off from statements to other things that we're actually being kind of condescending to our students and their own ideas and their own enthusiasm to get involved. And what I'd hate to do is say, oh, you're really amped up about this. Like, yes, how do I empower you to go out and be responsible, caring, listening, and addressing this, as opposed to saying, oh, don't do anything because you might mess it all up. Right. So I think there's a real strong balance there. And these are just these are really sad things, but also wonderful opportunities for healing and bringing folks together. And you know, at a small institution, we're all interconnected here. So losses felt strongly, and especially whether it's community or students. And I think it's great to know that people have been supportive and have been together and are working together to address these things.
Thanks.
Can I just add real quick, Laurie? Real super quick. So we have a restorative justice center on our campus, and those peer-led conversations are an opportunity for students to safely air concerns that they have. And police shootings has been a topic of a restorative justice circle. You know, racism is a topic of those. So those dialogues, right? And I think deliberative dialogue models are really critical in this area too. The safe spaces for conversation. And as Craig said, then, you know, our role is to support students in their advocacy in an apolitical way. So regardless of what the student values, we want to inspire them towards change. So those opportunities to move from fear and, you know, and thought to action are really what we want to be about.
Wow. So does anybody have a 60-second response to how do you tie this conversation back to engaged scholarship, and how scholarly engagement with communities helps to answer questions that are important or define a focus for engagement in the institution?
As an editor, I'll take that first, just real quick. I no longer consider myself a general researcher. I consider myself an academic journalist. Every community has a story to be told. Every program has a story to be told. It's not about top tier journals. That's good and that's great. But what it's about is getting those stories of these communities told so we all can learn how to be better together. So if you need ever help with that, I'm glad to be a resource or node or network for you.
I'll keep it very quick too. Our whole approach is based on academics. The Lang Center resides within the Provost's office division. And so all that we do is supporting faculty and student research and teaching. And we then pair those in a way that I think it was one of you said earlier, but community-driven way. I think, Laura, it was you. And we look out, the Lang Center looks for communities that have certain needs, interests, whatever, and then try to match them up with scholars doing work and research. So it's very significantly, our whole community engagement thing is tied in with academics.
I'll offer briefly that the work that we do as a placemaking and place invested institution comes right back into the academic role that we've got. So the Hazelwood work that we're doing to crosswalk the life sciences into pre-K-12 workforce and community development, you know, we've got a call for capstone classes to be deeply invested in that. The work that we're thinking through and in how we come around nonprofit capacity building for economic sufficiency, it's predicated on a model of pulling those nonprofit organizations into the research and teaching programs and resources that we've got at the institution. So I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, you know, our engagement is really fundamentally intertwined with our core mission, our core academic mission, because that's the toolbox from which we pull so often in this kind of work.
Great. I think we are out of time. Thank you all for a great conversation. This is the highlight of my day, maybe my month. So thank you all very much. And thank you all for participating, listening. Thanks, Heather, for the question. And everybody take care and have a good end of the semester. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, everyone.